Hey guys, welcome back to part 3 and the conclusion to our talk on the new origin of Killmonger. And even looking back on it in the way it was done, rather than it being a new origin, it's more like it's more fully explained, especially with the way that it ties into its pre-existing history. So let's talk about all that. But first, if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to catch the spills every week. And don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, so previously in our talks about Killmonger's origin and how it ties into much of the pre-existing history, like the further it goes, we begin to see a lot more of that. And I'd have to say, like in retrospect, the best way to view this miniseries is more so like a narrative that fills in the gaps. But right away, just picking up where we left off with Eric linking up with this crew that was working for Wilson Fisk, and shortly after catching a vibe shooting shots with one of the members of this group by the name of Knight, to whom was the only member of that group that he had really opened up to. But around the time that Eric was brought in, Knight had been working with S.H.I.E.L.D. through a contact with Black Widow, and not doing this so much for reasons of betrayal, but more so towards the end goal of having an exit strategy, because she knows the things that her team has been running and doing, they can't do this forever, or at least not without ending up dead like Rook, or on the other hand getting thrown under the jail. But with her initially making this deal with S.H.I.E.L.D., initially it was just to give up the Kingpin in order to buy her freedom and a fresh start. And as far as Eric, at this point in time, he hadn't really done anything to get on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s radar, so in his case the pressure wasn't so much on him versus the idea of using him to help Knight to take down the last remaining and most dangerous member of their team, which was King. Because for Knight, who at this point was really just concerned with her own freedom, she then ended up making a deal with Natasha Romanoff that if she was just to hand over Knight, then she would be free. But from Eric's perspective, he only agreed to help her out because he cared for her, and he had told her genuinely that he would take her to Wakanda with him, and sure, there would be a little bit more war, a little more bloodshed, but after that they would rule together with her as his queen. And this is something like in the beginning I was skeptical about, like if he was really for real, and as it turns out he really was. And he even went as far as to the point to say that he would set aside his vengeance for her, which for him is kind of like having your cake and eating it too, because getting vengeance and taking the throne is kind of two birds in one stone type of thing. But the most important takeaway is that he truly meant what he said to her, as far as him viewing her as his queen and wanting her to stay with him. But so after this, and when they make their way to Bulgaria, which is where King has told Knight is where he went off to when everything was over, but King had never mentioned that he had a wife, and obviously keeping his wife's secret for his wife's protection. But when Knight and Eric arrive here, Knight doesn't just come in guns blazing trying to take him down by force, but rather she just tells him the truth about everything, and doing so in a very naive way, as if King would just hand over his freedom. And when King rejects it immediately, Eric just asks him to step outside so they can talk, which is actually what King would prefer because he doesn't want his wife getting worked up with this whole conversation. But as far as Knight, let me get back to Knight. With her even making this offer to King, which on the surface sounds stupid, and then there's another layer that makes sense, and then underneath that layer is stupid again. It's just one big stupid cake. But as far as the part that makes sense, her idea is for him to turn himself in while he still holds value. And for the type of work that they're in, she's being super optimistic, because on one hand, yeah, if you get the man in, and that man being King, who had worked closer with Fisk than any of the others, yes, it's true that he would be able to give you more valuable information, but at the same time, a lot of that valuable information has a clock on it as far as how long it is good until it expires, because King would of course know up-and-coming meetups, potential targets, and a whole lot of other useful information that S.H.I.E.L.D. could use to either stop Wilson Fisk or put him away for good. And Knight's main argument was to turn yourself in now before your value expires. And so for Eric, pulling King outside and talking to him, like he was really at least trying to help him, and even telling him like, hey, if you choose to run, hey, that's cool, but you got more options around the world than me and Knight do. And speaking of Knight, on their way walking back, Knight comes out the cabin with King's wife at gunpoint, which for Knight is another one of those moments of her just making a hasty decision, because she's always said and she's always believed that King is not someone who can be persuaded just simply by words, but in his case you also got to apply a little action with it. And so with her coming outside with his wife at gunpoint, Celia, it's more of a scare tactic, and she's called in help to take down King, and that help being just some freelance bounty hunters, whom she announces will be arriving within seconds. And just to be clear, Eric didn't know anything about this, and it's even at this moment that she tells Eric that she doesn't plan to go with him to no fantasy land. Like at this moment she is bailing on every preconceived plan that she's had for everyone except for herself. And so when the freelance mercs show up, of course it doesn't get any better, but this is also something that Knight could have avoided even after making the arrangement for them to come, because had she just stayed calm and not sent out the signal for them to come in, the three of them could have worked out an entirely different arrangement. But of course with these inexperienced bounty hunters that she probably found on Craigslist, when they come in they're not just going for King, but they're going for everybody except for Knight, of course. And with King's only concern keeping his wife safe, safe, which Eric tries to help him do as King goes to take these guys out. King ends up getting wet up in the process, and though in his efforts he's only able to take one of them out, and Celia is still caught in the crossfire, leaving King and his wife dead, which pisses Eric off. Like, from there he just goes bananas, and he single-handedly takes down the other two. Because the both of them were more focused on finishing off King, Eric uses the element of surprise to his advantage, and he just takes the two of them out. But as far as Knight isn't so easy to take down, mainly because she's a mutant, and not a crazy powerful one, but she is much stronger than your average man, which is about where Killmonger's at this point. But even at this point with defending herself, she's also doing so verbally and letting him know that she didn't intend for it to go down this way. And after getting the upper hand, she tells Eric, if I was you, I would kill you. But more so out of a place of guilt and shame, she spares his life, leaving Eric and King in the middle of the field. And when Eric goes to check on King, like, King with his dying breath gives Eric the key to his cellar, telling Eric that down there he'll find what he needs and to get revenge for all of them. Which is like one of those crazy moments when someone you've known for years betrays you, but then on the other hand, this person you've met for a matter of months, you've grown a much deeper connection and friendship with. But right when King dies, Eric meets Kaluna, Wakanda's forgotten god of war, and she addresses him by his Wakanda name, of course, Njadika. But what we also find out is that she's been forsaken much like Eric by Wakanda. But in this moment, Eric's anger and his thirst for vengeance open a pathway for her to finally find him. But it's from here that she tells Eric that she's going to teach him all the truths that Wakanda has hidden about her with so many lies. And even up until this point, the only trace of any knowledge of her in Wakanda, they're really just images of her with no name, just made as a warning to be perceived to the people of Wakanda as a symbol of betrayal. But here she tells Eric, I see your future. I see you throwing Bast off of the Warrior Falls into the darkness so that he can take vengeance for the both of them. And in exchange, she will give him strength, she'll give him wisdom, she'll teach him the truth, she'll mentor him with war tactics. And from this moment forward, though he physically has nobody else, that she will always be with him. And so it's shortly after seeing her that Eric goes down to the basement of King, to where he now has access to King's entire arsenal, his armor, his cabin, pretty much everything. And so now from here, and just really referring back to what I mentioned earlier on this playlist, where I noticed that much of these events had pulled from things that we had seen in Rise of the Black Panther, and it's mainly because we come to find out towards the conclusion of the Killmonger miniseries, and really more so after Eric meets Kaluna, and we fast forward 1 year catching up with Knight, that we see even more so that a lot of that foreshadowing wasn't just nods to the older comics, but rather it had dubbed this Killmonger miniseries as a prequel that runs side by side with Rise of the Black Panther. But as far as jumping 1 year forward, when we follow up with Knight, who's living in London under her new identity, which is provided by S.H.I.E.L.D., she arrives back at her townhome only to see Eric there waiting on her. And I gotta say, granted that it's only been 1 year, like, this guy is huge. He is way huger than he was before. And this drastic change between 1 year's time is a combination of a couple things. And sure, part of it is working out, but in addition to that, he's also been given strength by his god Kaluna, which going forward is definitely going to be your explanation to why he's able to go toe to toe with the Black Panther. Or even more than that, tackle an elephant every now and then, like we had talked about back when I covered when Everett Ross became Black Panther. And yes, that happened. But when he comes here to see Knight, he requests that she gives him confidential information that S.H.I.E.L.D. has on the Black Panther, and in exchange he'll release her sister. And so what he does is he gives her the hard drive, and it's pretty much decision proof, so she can't mess it up by making her own decisions again, because when she does, it's usually the wrong one, and Black Widow has been playing that to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s advantage over and over again. So he gives her the hard drive, tells her to take it to S.H.I.E.L.D., just plug it up, it'll download what it needs to and bring it back. And so when she unplugs the drive and takes it to meet up with Eric, who at this point in time is fully suited up in King's armor with a few additional touches that he's added himself. But when they meet here at this location, he tells Knight that where he's going, there's better armor there for him, he just has to go and take it. But where the curveball comes in here is when she hands him the hard drive, he just breaks it, and mainly because this hard drive wasn't set to download anything, but rather it was made to upload illegal transactions that were set up to make Knight appear like she'll return back to a life of crime. And so now prior to this, when she had left Killmonger to die pretty much, and not really so much left him to die, but just left him beaten and laying out in the snow, when she went back to Natasha Romanoff in S.H.I.E.L.D., she was actually expecting them to give her a position at S.H.I.E.L.D. with the assumption that they would make her a special agent like Natasha Romanoff. But Romanoff was like, no. Like, she gave Knight the chance to impress her, that really didn't happen, so Romanoff just gave her a clean slate, cut her a check, and just told Knight, like, don't mess up your new start. And that's where Killmonger's like, what? That's a nice new start you got there. It'd be a shame if somebody messed that up. But with him making it seem like Knight had went back into her old life of crime and connecting this drive to S.H.I.E.L.D.'s computers, which he knew would send a red flag to S.H.I.E.L.D. and have them come back to where they were. He then takes down all of the S.H.I.E.L.D. agents and using moves that none of them could keep up with. And when he finally gets to Knight, he takes her out, telling her that her sister's already dead. But even in this fight between the two of them, unlike how it went down a year ago, her strength is no match for his strength, speed, and skill. But just before she dies, she sees behind him Kilmonger, his god, who has given him his vengeance. And it's a crazy look because she has no idea what has happened over the course of this last year. But in a form of a bit of poetic justice, the last thing that she sees is actually the physical proof of what this quote land that she called a fairy tale was actually something real. Like these fairy tales that Eric always spoke of, like in this moment in her mind, it's like, well, maybe he wasn't so crazy after all. But even through her betrayal, even through the moment to his revenge, ever since they were intimate, he had always referred to her as queen, and even in his revenge, he continued to do so. But after this was done, he just walked out the front door, and he knew when he left that backup agents for S.H.I.E.L.D. would be arriving at the front as well, but he had a little surprise waiting for them too. But even when this happened, you can tell that there was a moment of grief on the part of Natasha Romanoff because she had felt sorry for Knight, and though Romanoff didn't know exactly who had did this, to Romanoff, Knight was just this confused little girl who of course she used, but at the end of the day, she doesn't believe that she deserved this. But so after this, and I want to say jumping forward like a few months later, it's here where we see Killmonger's story go directly into the pages of the rise of Black Panther. Because previously when I mentioned a time when N'Jadika had spoken with the White Wolf shortly after his conversation with T'Challa, it's here where we get the addition to that conversation with T'Challa, where he shows Eric, or N'Jadika, one of the only images of Kilmonger in Wakanda, showing that she is the sister of Bast, the betrayer of Wakanda, and that the image of Kilmonger is only good to the people as a warning of where hatred and anger can take them. But that'll do it for the Killmonger miniseries. You know, on one hand, I thought it would go further to like the actual fight on Warrior Falls, just more so ending with Killmonger's victory, even though we know that's not the end of the story. But just in my opinion, I feel like that would have been like a grander way to just end it. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, and we'll do it again in the next one. Alright, later.